Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going back in time to a Dublin you might not recognize. A city in flames. Not from the bombs of World War I, but from a rebellion against the mighty British Empire. You sent us some excerpts from the Rest is History podcast about the 1916 Easter Rising. We're going to dive deep into this pivotal event together.
It's a fascinating moment in history, often overshadowed by the larger conflict, World War I. But the Easter Rising, despite its apparent failure, had a seismic impact on the course of Irish history. It's a story of ambition, miscalculation, and ultimately the power of ideas to reshape a nation.
So before we get into the heart of the rebellion, let's set the scene. Ireland in the early 20th century was a powder keg.
Yeah.
Home rule, this long-fought-for dream of limited self-governance for Ireland, was on the table, but facing constant setbacks.
It was a complex issue. The idea of home rule was deeply divisive, splitting Irish society and the British Parliament. Some saw it as a step towards full independence, while others feared it would weaken the union with Britain. The delays and the political wrangling only fueled frustration and a sense of betrayal among those who longed for greater autonomy.
And you've got World War I raging in the background,
Yeah.
adding another layer of complexity. How did the war affect the situation in Ireland?
The war had a profound impact, both in practical and ideological terms. On a practical level, it led to increased militarization in Ireland, with many young men joining the British Army. But it also sparked debates about Irish identity and loyalty. Should Ireland, under British rule, be contributing to a war that many felt didn't serve their interests?
So you have this backdrop of simmering tensions and a war that's forcing people to re-examine their allegiances. It seems like the perfect breeding ground for radical ideas.
Precisely. This is where groups like the Irish Republican Brotherhood come into play. The IRB. They were a clandestine organization dedicated to the complete overthrow of British rule and the establishment of an independent Irish republic. For years, they had been operating in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike.
And the war, with all its turmoil and uncertainty, seemed to provide that opportunity.
Exactly. Figures like Tom Clark, a veteran of previous revolutionary attempts, saw World War I as a chance to exploit British vulnerability and finally achieve their goal of an independent Ireland.
But the IRB wasn't the only group pushing for change. The Irish Citizen Army also emerges as a key player. The ICA, they had a very different origin story, didn't they?
Indeed. The ICA, led by James Connolly, a Scottish-born socialist, was initially formed to protect workers' rights during the Dublin lockout of 1913, a major industrial dispute that highlighted the plight of the working class.
So how did a group focused on labor rights end up joining forces with the IRB, which was ultimately fighting for national liberation?
It's a fascinating shift. Connolly, a committed socialist, saw the war as an imperialist conflict, a struggle between powerful nations that exploited the working class for their own gain. He believed that true freedom for Ireland could only be achieved through a socialist revolution that addressed both national and economic inequality.
So he found common cause with the IRB. Despite their different ideological backgrounds, it seems like the common enemy, British rule, united these disparate groups.
Exactly. They believed that a successful rebellion would not only free Ireland from British rule, but also create a more just and equitable society for all its citizens.
And amidst all this political ferment, we have this captivating figure, Patrick Pearse, who becomes a central figure in the Easter Rising. He's a fascinating character, a poet, an educator, and a passionate nationalist.
Pearse is key to understanding the motivations behind the Rising. He believed deeply in the power of Irish culture and language, seeing them as essential components of a distinct national identity that had been suppressed under British rule. He also believed that education was a crucial tool for building a strong and independent nation.
So he wasn't just a political revolutionary, he was a cultural visionary, someone who saw the rebellion as a means to revive Irish identity and create a truly free and independent nation.
Precisely. Pearse articulated a powerful vision that resonated with many who yearned for a break from British rule. He believed that achieving true freedom might require sacrifice, even a blood sacrifice, to awaken the spirit of the Irish people and inspire them to fight for their rightful place in the world.
So we have the stage set, a nation on edge, simmering resentments, and a confluence of revolutionary groups with their own agendas and motivations. But as with any grand plan, things don't always unfold as expected. One of the first major setbacks for the rebellion was the failed attempt to secure arms from Germany. Tell us about that.
The rebels, acutely aware that they were outgunned by the British military, sought support from Germany. which was at war with Britain. Sir Roger Casement, a prominent Irish humanitarian who had become disillusioned with British imperialism, played a key role in this effort.
And Casement had a remarkable background. He had exposed atrocities in the Congo and Peru, earning international acclaim for his humanitarian work. It's a stark contrast to his later role as a gunrunner for the rebels.
His transformation highlights the complex dynamics of the time. Casement's experiences with British colonialism convinced him that Ireland's freedom could only be achieved through force. He traveled to Germany, seeking arms and support for the rebellion.
But this mission proved disastrous, didn't it?
Yes, tragically so. The Germans agreed to provide weapons, but the shipment was intercepted by the British Navy. Casement himself was captured. Trying to land in Ireland, this was a major blow to the rebellion's chances of success.
And this setback wasn't the end of their troubles. Internal divisions and miscommunication within the rebel leadership almost derailed the rising entirely.
Indeed. On Easter Sunday, the day the rebellion was initially planned, Ewan MacNeill, a leader of the Irish Volunteers, a more moderate nationalist group, got wind of the failed gun running and the arrest of Casement. Concerned about the lack of arms and fearing a bloodbath, he issued orders canceling the maneuvers that were meant to mask the rebellion.
So imagine the chaos, the confusion, the plan is unraveling. Their key source of weapons is gone, and now their own allies are pulling out.
The IRB was faced with a critical decision: proceed with a significantly weakened force and risk a swift and brutal defeat, or postpone the rebellion and hope for a better opportunity.
And what did they choose?
Driven by a sense of urgency and a belief that they had to make a stand, no matter the cost, the IRB, led by Pierce, decided to proceed with the rebellion, albeit a day later, and with a much smaller force than originally anticipated.
It seems like an incredibly risky gamble, a decision driven as much by desperation as by strategic calculation. What happened next?
Well, on Easter Monday, 1916, a small band of rebels, numbering around 1,200, took to the streets of Dublin, launching a rebellion that would forever alter the course of Irish history.
So they went ahead with it, this small force, facing the might of the British Empire. What were their objectives? What did they hope to achieve?
Their primary target was symbolic: the General Post Office, or GPO, in the heart of Dublin. Seizing the GPO wasn't about strategic military value. It was about making a bold statement, proclaiming to the world their intention to establish an independent Irish Republic.
And that's where Pierce famously read the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, right?
Yes.
A document that would become a cornerstone of Irish history.
Yes. On Easter Monday, with a small group of rebels surrounding him, Pierce read the proclamation. Declaring Ireland a sovereign and independent nation, it was a powerful moment, an act of defiance that resonated far beyond the streets of Dublin.
But the rebellion wasn't just confined to the GPO. The rebels also seized other strategic locations throughout the city.
They took control of places like City Hall, Boland's Mill, and the Jacob's Biscuit Factory. However, some key targets, like Dublin Castle, the seat of British power in Ireland, and Trinity College, were left untouched. This suggests a degree of tactical inconsistency, perhaps reflecting the last-minute changes to their plans.
And how did the people of Dublin react to this sudden uprising in their midst? Did the rebels find the widespread support they were hoping for?
The public's response was surprisingly mixed. Some were intrigued by the spectacle, others were fearful or indifferent, and some were actively hostile to the rebels. The rebellion didn't trigger the spontaneous outpouring of support that the leaders had envisioned.
It seems like they misjudged the mood of the public. Perhaps they underestimated the lingering loyalty to the British crown or the fear of reprisal.
It's a crucial point. The rebellion exposed the complexities of Irish society at the time. It wasn't a simple case of everyone yearning for independence. There were deep divisions, both political and religious, that shaped people's responses to the uprising.
And the British, of course, weren't just going to stand idly by. How did they respond to this challenge to their authority?
Their reaction was swift and decisive. Initially, they were taken aback by the audacity of the rebellion, but they quickly mobilized troops from England and Wales to quell the uprising.
And by Wednesday, they'd even brought in a gunboat, the Helga, to shell rebel positions along the Liffey River. That must have been a terrifying sight for the people of Dublin.
The arrival of the Helga marked a significant escalation in the conflict. It demonstrated the overwhelming firepower the British were willing to deploy to crush the rebellion. The shelling of Liberty Hall, the headquarters of the ICA, was a particularly dramatic moment, signifying the serious threat the rebels faced.
So trapped in the GPO and other strongholds, facing artillery fire and the might of the British military, what chance did the rebels have?
Their situation was increasingly desperate. Outnumbered and outgunned, they held out for as long as they could. But the GPO, under constant bombardment, eventually went up in flames. It must have been a terrifying ordeal for those inside.
And Pierce, facing the inevitability of defeat, made the decision to surrender, to avoid further bloodshed.
Yes. On Saturday morning, after 6 days of fighting, Pierce and the remaining rebels surrendered unconditionally. The rebellion, at least in a military sense, was over.
But as we know, the story doesn't end there. In fact, the aftermath of the Easter Rising is where things get really interesting. The British response to the surrender would have unintended consequences that would fundamentally reshape the landscape of the Irish independence movement.
That's exactly right. The British, in seeking to make an example of the rebels and deter future uprisings, made a series of decisions that would ultimately backfire, fueling the very cause they sought to extinguish.
So tell us about those decisions. What did the British do that had such a profound impact on public opinion in Ireland?
Their first misstep, in the eyes of many Irish people, was the decision to execute the leaders of the rebellion. 16 men, including Pierce, Connolly, and other key figures, were court-martialed and sentenced to death.
Now, executions following a rebellion aren't exactly uncommon in history. What made these executions so significant?
It was the manner in which they were carried out and the specific individuals targeted. The executions were conducted in secret, with limited access for the press or the public. This lack of transparency, combined with the swiftness of the sentences, fueled rumors and speculation, further inflaming public opinion.
It created a sense of injustice, a feeling that the rebels were denied a fair trial and condemned without due process.
Precisely. And the choice of individuals executed was also significant. They weren't just military figures. They included poets, writers, teachers, and intellectuals, individuals who held a certain moral authority in the eyes of many.
So by executing these figures, the British inadvertently created martyrs for the cause of Irish independence.
Yes, the executions transformed the public perception of the rebellion and its leaders. Suddenly, they weren't just seen as rebels, but as heroes, as patriots who had sacrificed their lives for the dream of an independent Ireland.
And this shift in public sentiment wasn't just confined to those who had already supported the rebellion. It reached a much broader segment of the population, those who had previously been indifferent or even opposed to the idea of an independent Ireland.
The executions were a turning point. They created a wave of sympathy and outrage that spread throughout Ireland, galvanizing those who had previously been hesitant to support the cause.
So, in a sense, the British, through their actions, handed the Irish independence movement a powerful propaganda victory.
That's a keen observation. They failed to understand the emotional impact their actions would have. They thought they were crushing a rebellion, but they were, in effect, planting the seeds for an even more determined and widespread movement for independence.
And this shift in public opinion had a profound impact on the political landscape of Ireland. Sinn Féin, the political party that had advocated for Irish self-determination, but had played a relatively minor role in the Rising itself, suddenly found itself thrust into the spotlight.
Before the Rising, Sinn Féin was a fringe group espousing a more radical form of nationalism than the more moderate Home Rule movement. But in the aftermath of the executions and the surge of nationalist sentiment, they became the dominant force in Irish politics.
So the Easter Rising, despite its military failure, had a profound and unintended impact on the course of Irish history. It shifted public opinion, created martyrs for the cause, and gave new momentum to the movement for independence.
Exactly. And this wasn't just about emotional responses. The rebellion also provided valuable tactical lessons for future revolutionaries, particularly those who would lead the fight for independence in the years to come.
Speaking of which, one figure who emerged from the Easter Rising and would play a pivotal role in the War of Independence was Michael Collins. How did his experience in 1916 shape his approach to the struggle against British rule?
Collins, a brilliant strategist and organizer, learned valuable lessons from both the successes and failures of the Easter Rising. He recognized the need for a more disciplined and coordinated approach, one that avoided the pitfalls of a symbolic but ultimately unsustainable urban uprising.
So he shifted the focus away from these grand symbolic gestures like the seizure of the GPO and towards a more effective, albeit less glamorous form of warfare.
Precisely, Collins recognized that guerrilla warfare, with its emphasis on speed, mobility, and surprise, was a far more effective tactic against the British. He understood that they couldn't defeat the British head-on in a conventional battle. They had to chip away at their control, disrupt their operations, and wear them down through a sustained campaign of hit-and-run attacks.
So the Easter Rising, in a sense, provided a blueprint, a set of lessons learned that would inform the tactics and strategies of the Irish War of Independence just a few years later.
That's right. It was a crucible, a testing ground where ideas were forged, tactics were refined, and leaders were made. It's a powerful example of how even a failed rebellion can have a profound and lasting impact on the course of history.
And it's not just about the tactical and political implications. The Easter Rising also had a profound impact on the cultural and emotional landscape of Ireland. The events of that week, the audacity of the rebels, the proclamation of the Republic, the executions, and the subsequent wave of outrage all contributed to creating a powerful and enduring narrative of Irish identity and resistance to British rule.
You're right. The Easter Rising became a touchstone, a symbol of Irish resilience and the enduring dream of independence. It inspired artists, writers, and musicians, shaping a distinctly Irish national consciousness that resonated far beyond the political sphere.
So the Easter Rising, while a military failure in the short term, was a turning point, a catalyst that transformed the struggle for Irish independence. It's a story that highlights the complex interplay of ideas, actions, and unintended consequences, reminding us that history is rarely a simple or straightforward narrative.
And it's a story that continues to resonate today as people around the world grapple with issues of identity, self-determination, and the legacy of colonialism. The Easter Rising, in its complexity and its contradictions, offers valuable lessons for understanding the enduring human struggle for freedom and justice.
Well, this deep dive has been truly illuminating. We've explored the context of the Easter Rising, the motivations of the key players, the events of that fateful week, and the profound impact the rebellion had on the course of Irish history.
We've seen how a seemingly doomed rebellion, crushed by the might of the British Empire, could nonetheless spark a revolution in hearts and minds, ultimately leading to the birth of an independent Irish nation.
And it reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to shape our understanding of the world.
It's a story filled with ambition, tragedy, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit to strive for a better future.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to delve deeper into this fascinating chapter of Irish history. Explore the biographies of the key figures, consider the contrasting perspectives, and reflect on the legacy of the Easter Rising and its relevance to the world we live in today. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations of the source material you provide. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.